Shalom, shalom, family, shalom, shalom, Shabbat shalom to everybody out there, Shabbat shalom to everybody out there today. We're going to start off this video right and on track by giving our praises, honor, and glory to our Elohim above, to our Father, of course, for giving us the ability to gather here today to review this history of his people, scattered beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, scattered to the four corners of the earth. All right, so as you can tell by the title today, we will be getting into Babylon to America Part 2. It's been a lot of people commenting on the videos I've previously done concerning the Sephardics, asking a lot of questions, making a lot of statements. So I felt as if it was basically needed to bring out another part to this video to just bring the complete history of these people and answer everybody's questions that you all have been leaving in the comment section. So this video is just to, basically show and prove who these people are, show how they connect with us, bring out all the history we can about them throughout this presentation. So we're about to get into that. And of course, we're going to start off reviewing a couple slides or information that might be familiar to you all. If you know about these Sephardic Jews, it might be familiar to you. But let me go ahead and get this slide ready, and then we can get into it. We're going to basically review everything we can to show that these are our people. 1 second. All right. Make sure we all good, then we get started. Change that. Okay. So the Royal Negroes, Spain and Portugal, so we'll be getting into today. We're going to start off with a quick scripture reference. 1 Chronicles chapter 9, verse 1. Get an understanding who we're dealing with. It says, so all Israel were reckoned by genealogies, and behold, they were written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah, who were carried away to Babylon for their transgressions. All right, so we're dealing with the children that were carried away to Babylon for their transgressions. Take it over to 2 Kings real quick to further get more information about these people. And you also can read this for context to get a better understanding of what was going on during that time of the Babylonian captivity. But first, verse 11 says, and Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came against the city, and his servants did besiege it. And Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mothers, and his servants, and his princes, and his officers. And the king of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign. And he carried out thence all the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold which Solomon, king of Israel, had made in the temple of God, in the temple of the Lord, as the Lord had said. And he carried away all Jerusalem, and all the princes, and all the mighty men of valor, even 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and smiths. None remained, save the poorest sort of the people of the land. And he carried away Jehoiakim to Babylon, and the king's mother, the king's wives, and his officers, and the mighty of the land. Those carried he into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. So again, we're dealing with these people who were taken away from Jerusalem to Babylon. That's important because when we go to the history of the Jews by Hannah Adams, we see that the Spanish and Portuguese Jews claimed their descent from the tribe of Judah and found these pretensions and supposition which prevail among them that many of their ancestors removed or were sent into Spain at the time of the Babylonian captivity. So again, that's why we read those previous scriptures to get an understanding that there were Israelites carried away captives to Babylon, and that these Sephardim maintain in their oral tradition that their ancestors were sent into Spain during the time of the Babylonian captivity. All right. It goes on to say something very interesting we can read. Just to add on, it says, in consequence of this supposed superiority, they till very lately would not marry or otherwise incorporate with their brethren of other nations. They had separate synagogues, and if a Portuguese Jew or a black Jew, even in England and Holland, married a Jewish Jew, he was immediately expelled from the synagogue, deprived of every civil and ecclesiastical right, and ejected from the body of the nation. So, right, so just like the Most High said, we were not meant to mix with these other nations. And the German Jews we know would be the Ashkenazim or European Jews. Continuing on to the scattered nation, past, present, and future, it says, whence we may learn, if we can believe it, that a king of Spain had assisted Nebuchadnezzar In reducing Jerusalem, brought an enormous population into Spain, all from either the family of David or at least from the tribe of Judah, and that the royal family resided first at Seville, then in Granada, adding to the exiles afterwards, had their numbers greatly increased by the fugitives from the desolation of the Second Temple. All right, so once again, these Sephardim trace their ancestry back to the Babylonian captivity, which we read in First Chronicles and Second Kings. Another interesting verse to point out real quick before we move on is Romans 15, when Paul was writing. He stated that, but as it is written, to whom he was not spoken of, they shall see, and they that have not heard, they shall understand, for which cause also I have been much hindered from coming to you, but now having no more place in these parts, having a great desire. These many years I come to you, wheresoever I take my journey into Spain. All right, we know that way before Paul came on the scene, these Sephardim was sent into Spain from Babylon. All right, so he says, whenever so I take my journey to Spain, I will come to you, for I trust to see you in my journey and to be brought on my way thitherward by you, if first I be somewhat filled with your company. All right, so I just threw this verse in there to propose the question: was Paul writing to these Sephardims within Spain, or these Babylonian exiles that got sent to Spain? But continuing on, what was the appearance of the Sephardim? All right, what was the appearance of these people? We can take it back to one of the earliest depictions of Israelite captives in Egypt, and we see that they are clearly a people of color, a melanated people, a reddish, dark brown shaded of people. All right, so we should expect these descendants in Spain and Portugal to look the same. We could take it a step further to the Babylonian Lachish reliefs of Judean captives taken from the city of Lachish. All right, so these will be descendants of Judah. We can see the woolly heads and the woolly beards, and also the physiognomy of their faces. A little closer, we see this brother up here, woolly headed, woolly beard, woolly beard, as well as the brothers to the bottom right, as well to the left. And we know the only people in the world that has woolly hair and woolly beards would be so-called people of color. So with that being said, these are those that were taken away captives to Babylon, these woolly-haired peoples. So when we go to sources and material, we should see the same thing transcribed in those sources. And shalom to everybody that's in the chat right now. So when we go to natural history of man, we see something very interesting, or we see something very simple, right? The Jews of Portugal are very dark, all right, which we should see sources saying that, as we just saw these released and these pictures from primary sources, right, such as the Egyptians and the Babylonians. So like I said, we just reviewing a couple information before we move on. And of course, I will leave the link to this presentation in the bio after we get done, and the sources will be linked with everything. So, to the Parfait Black Jews in African Americas, we see that it says the same thought is expressed in the contemporary Sefer Yosef HaMakani, and Sefer Yosef HaMakani is a Sephardic Jew himself. And it says, which boasts that we Jews are from a clean and white seed, therefore our faces are black, but you from the red seed of menstruation, therefore your visages are pale and reddened. All right, so the Jews the Jews had an understanding that because their faces were black, they were from a clean and white seed. But continuing on to the highlighted, it says the idea that the Jews were black persisted into the 19th century. Robert Knox, the controversial surgeon, an antagonist and conservator of the College Museum Edinburgh in the mid-19th century, commented on the African character of the Jew, his muzzle-shaped mouth and face removing him from other races. And the reason I'm getting into the depiction and sources letting us know what these Jews look like is because when we get to the continent of Africa, we don't have any confusion on what these people look like or who these people were, because there was a lot of comments going around talking about these people were white, these Jews expelled to West Africa was white, and they was mixing with these women, making mulatto children. And that's far from the truth, family. That's far from the truth. Because like it said, the Jews had an African character, right? The general look of the Jew was considered to be that like the black, all right? The contour is fixed, the eyes long and fine, the outer angles running towards the temples, the brow and nose apart to form a single convex line, And the whole physiognomy, when swarthy, as it is often, has a African look. So because these people are swarthy or black, they often have an African look. So that's regarding the Jews. And that would include the Sephardim. Nature knows no color line. It tells us that the Jews also brought in much Negro strain. Some of the noblest of the Sephardic families, aristocrats of Jewry, were Negroes. All right, so these people were indeed people of color, so-called Negroes of today. Isaac da Costa mentions sons and grandsons, Don David Yasha ben Yashi, who were royal treasurers, court physicians, astrologers, and royal favorites at the court of Castile in Portugal, one whom was Don David Negro. All right, so even these Sephardics had the surname Negro. Not only that, like it said at the very top, they brought in much Negro strain, and the noblest of the Sephardic families were Negroes. You can't get around that. You cannot get around that. It goes on to say, White says an interesting gradation of all shades down to the black is exhibited by the Jews, especially dark were the Jews of Spain and Portugal. The Portuguese Jews were very dark, says Pritchard. The Duchess de Abrantes, wife of Napoleon's ambassador to Portugal, said the Jew, the Negro, and the Portuguese can be seen in a single person. All right, so like the Duchess de Abrantes, wife of Napoleon, states, the Jew, the Negro, and the Portuguese can be seen in a single person because they were. All right, the Jew, the Negro, and the Portuguese or the Sephardim were all the same people during this time in Spain and Portugal. And yes, the brother Dietrich, that's exactly right. He says there are some places that say mulatto was actually darker skin than the average Jew, and that's facts because when we dealing with that word mulatto, it can simply mean a European and an African. But is that talking about a black European and a black African, or a white European and a black African? So these mulattoes, they were birthed from black Jews and black Africans, which we will get into later on. But when Scotland was Jewish, all right, is what we're going to next. I'm going to start right here. It says the Scottish royal stewards were equally dark and Semitic in appearance, all right, dark and Semitic in appearance. Of Charles II's dusty appearance, his mother, Queen Henrietta Maria, had been half mortified, writing after her confinement that the child was so dark she was ashamed of him. He was quickly dubbed the Black Boy. Enemies made out that he was a black bastard begotten by a black Scotsman. But what we're going to see is that once down here, we further suggest that the forebears were the Mediterranean Jews from France, Spain, and Portugal. So the Scottish royal stewards were Sephardic Jews, and they were described as dark and Semitic in appearance. We go over here and we see that we will propose that Knox was the grandson or son of a Sephardic Jewish immigrants to Scotland. We know after these people were expelled from Portugal, they went into Scotland as well. And look at this picture. Who do we see? Depicted a so-called Sephardic Jew who looks exactly like Negroes of today, or should I say elder Negroes of today. Continuing on. Get ready to wrap up this appearance. The races of men. This is a hard hitter right here. The purest of the Jewish races, dark and tawny, yellow-colored person with jet black hair and eyes seemingly colored. There is no mistaking the race when pure. It is Egyptian. That is African, all right? The source is not saying that the Jews are Egyptian. It's just saying that the purest of the Jews, when there is pure and when the race is pure, it is African. Like it says, the purest of the Jewish race is dark, tawny, yellow colored person with jet black hair. There is no mistaking the race when pure. It is Egyptian, that is African. So these Jews are Africans, not Europeans, all right? So now let's get into the banishment of these Sephardics. To do that, we're going to jump to the history of the Jews real quick. Right here. It says, Abarbanel was not the only Jewish favorite at Alfonso's court. Two brothers are Ben Yacha Negro. All right, once again, these people had surname Negro because they were Negro. They were called royal Negroes, right? Also frequented the court at Lisbon. They were sons of a certain Don David who had recommended them not to invest their rich inheritance into real estate, for he saw that banishment was in store for the Portuguese Jews. So banishment was in store for them. Continuing on. The history and the description of Africa, real quick, just to bring something out. And it says, not so much as the name of the melody was ever known unto the Africans. Before Trinidad, the king of Castile expelled all Jews out of Spain, after the return of which Jews into Africa. All right. So in order to return somewhere, you have to be from there. All right. So like this source says, it was a return of Jews into Africa. Just like the previous sources we've read telling us that the Jews were African, the Jews were black, the Jews were Negro. This is why, because they were from Africa and they was in Africa since the earliest times of their existence. So now let's get into the expulsion of these people into Africa, the Jews and Moors in Spain. It says, ships stood ready in the harbors to carry nearly all of the banished 300,000 Jews wherever so it suited the captains best. Into these ships, the exiles were literally packed, crowded together without regard to sex or age, often mother torn from child, husband from wife, brother from sister, friend from friend, and separated on the coast, meant separation forever. And of course, we see this outline in Deuteronomy 28:32. Thy sons and thy daughters shall be given to another people, and thy eyes shall look and fail with longing for them all day long, and there shall be no might in thy hand. Goes on to say, down to the shore came priests and holding a crucifix in the one hand and provision in the other. The unfortunate Jews were given a choice between Christ and starvation. Another shipload was cast out by a barbarous captain upon the African coast, where the African savage pounced down upon them and abandoned themselves in frightful cruelties. The men and the youth they sold into slavery. All right, Deuteronomy 28:41. Thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity. And we're going to notice is they keep saying that these Jews were sold into slavery, but it never mentioned where. Where were they sold into slavery at? So just please make sure you stick through this whole video, because we're going to take it all the way, and we're going to get into where exactly they were sold to, who they were sold with, and all that. Basically, we're going to get into it. So just stick through. Nearly 150 souls made their way by land to Portugal, whose King John II dispensed with his scruples of conscience so far as to allow his greed to trumpet over his creed. He granted them a passage through Africa. He granted them a passage through his dominion on their way to Africa. My bad, family. It goes on to say down here, when the news reached the homeless exiles of their atrocity crimes inflicted upon their brethren on their way to African coast by the inhumane captains and heartless crews, seeing nothing but cruel death before them, whether going or whether remaining, they preferred meeting death in Portugal to exposing themselves to the inhumanity and beastly thrusts and tortures of barbarous pirates, sailors, and African savage, and leastly awaiting death and praying for it. They remained at their time purchased for their stay and had passed away. To their misfortune, the plague had broke out in Portugal and raged with death and fury. Goes on to say, all Jewish children below 14 years of age were torn from their parents' arms, dragged into the church, and baptized. Those under the years of 3 years of age were given to Christians to receive a Christian education, or in other words, be raised as slaves. Those between 3 and 10 years of age were put on board a ship conveyed to the newly discovered and unwholesome island called the Island of Perdition, which was colonized by Portuguese condemned criminals. All right, these Portuguese condemned criminals were those who would not basically convert to Christianity rather. And it was also those who were basically caught doing Judaism practices, or basically still practicing Jewish laws and customs. Those were those Portuguese condemned criminals that were sent to the island of St. Thomas. It says to fare there as best as they could. Those between 10 and 14 years old were sold as slaves. All right, childrenless and brokenhearted, they now sought to leave the land, but they were told that they had to forfeit their rights, and they were given the choice between baptism and slavery. Thousands were sold as slaves. All right, keep that in mind. Thousands of these people were sold as slaves, but where? Yet prior to their being sold, they were submitted to tortures, cruelties, outrages, too revolting, too repulsive, too heart-rendering to be here narrated. So these people were baptized, all right, forced Christianity on them, as well as exiled to the Americas, to the South Americas, to the western coast of Africa, and even to other European countries. The History of the Jews of Spain and Portugal. This is a different author. This is by E.H. Lindo. All right, this is by E.H. Lindo. Up top, it says, in Portugal, the merciless tribunal had not yet established when upwards of 200,000 of forced converts were murdered and plundered by a mob on Lisbon on Easter Sunday, the 19th April, 1506. Yet our people want to celebrate Easter when we was getting lynched and mobbed, murdered and plundered on Easter Sunday. Right? While one monk was inviting from the pulpit, two other Dominicans sailed forth with crucifixes, right, crosses in their hands, exclaiming, heresy, heresy, and offering 100 days indulgence to every Christian who shall kill a Jew or anyone who confined to Judaism. They soon collected a mob which was increased by a number of Dutch and Danish sailors who had landed from their vessels then lying in the Tigers. They slew and mangled their victims, casting many, while yet living into the fires the Negroes. All right, I could have sworn they was talking about Jews. Why are they living into the fire Negroes? If it just said that they will offer 100 days indulgence to every Christian who should kill a Jew or anyone who conformed to Judaism. It's because these Negroes were the Jews, as well as we just saw sources saying that, the noblest of the Sephardic families were Negroes. We just saw that these people had the surname Negro. So all we need to do is put 1 and 2 together. It's going to equal 3, family. It says, fires the Negroes and Vestal rabble had kindled at the church doors, to which they kept constantly adding fuel. On Monday, the numbers of the mob were considerably augmented from the neighboring villages. The massacre and butchery of the new Christians were continued. All right, so these Negroes, these Jews, these were the new Christians. So remember that. It says the Castilian Jews who from poverty or any other cause had not deported at the limited time the king ordered should be taken for slaves according to the terms of their entrance and distributed to them to whoever asked for them. All right. His inhumanity did not cease here. He tore their young children from them and baptized them, being at the time of desires and peopling of the newly discovered acquisite on the coast of Africa, the island of St. Thomas. He sent them to it with the new governor, Alvaro, all right, so that by being separated from their parents and marrying people in the island, they might become good Christians. Now we're about to get ready and get into when these people got into Africa, finally, but we're going to read this from the Hibernian magazine, all right, and it says, King John II in 1492 expelled all the Jews to the island of St. Thomas, which had been discovered in 1471, and to other Portuguese settlements on the continent of Africa. And from these Spanish Jews, the black Portuguese, right? Yet people telling us that these were white Jews. Yet these sources are letting us know that these were what? Black Jews. All right. And from these Spanish Jews, these Spanish Sephardic Jews, the black Portuguese, as they are called, and the Jews of Luango are despised even by the very Negroes are descended. Continuing on, a textbook of the origin and history of colored people, all right? It tells us that the Portuguese who planted themselves on the coast of Africa a few centuries ago have been succeeded by descendants blacker than Africans. Can't no white Jews come to Africa, mix with black women, and birth children that are blacker than Africans. You will see a bunch of Drakes walking around, all right? You will see a bunch of Drakes walking around. These were black men mixing with black women. And they were probably black women of Israelite tribes. But either way it goes, these Sephardics were coming into Africa, mixing, making more Sephardic children. Babylon to Timbuktu real quick. And it says, it is obvious that the Jews were deported to Sao Tome, not only to mete out punishment to them, so they not only went to these islands or these Portuguese colonial possessions for punishment, but because King John's alternative motive was to establish a commercial base with sophisticated black Jews in his growing empire. All right, so he wanted these black Jews in there to basically be involved in commerce and what is it? What is the word I'm looking for? What is the word I'm looking for? It's on the tip of my tongue, but we'll go over it. We'll get into it. Merchants, right? Merchants. These Jews came into Africa. They was merchants. They was in commercial enterprise, and they was in those type of things. So now that we've reviewed that, everybody look to the bottom of the page, and we see these names at the bottom: Black Portuguese, Lancado, Luso-African, Ladino, Euro-African, Creoles, and Afro-Portuguese. These are all the names that these Sephardics were known by. All right, these are all the names that these Sephardics were known by when they came into Africa. So to prove that, we're going to get into it. So let's see. Okay, so I got two sources up on the screen for you all right now. One is from the History in Africa, a journal of method, and the other one is a history of Portuguese overseas expansion, 1400 through 1668. The top one says Luso-African or Afro-Portuguese. Just letting you know that the Luso-Africans, Afro-Portuguese were the same people. And also the word Lancado and Afro-Portuguese, or the Lancados are Afro-Portuguese of the Upper Guinean region. That's important because we're going to find out that all these names were just names used for these Sephardic Jews in different regions. So the evolution of Portuguese identity, Luso-African on the Upper Guinea coast from the 16th to the early 19th century. It says during the late 15th and early 16th century, Portuguese established a trading presence along the Upper Guinea coast from Senegal to Sierra Leone. Immigrants from Portugal, known as Lacados or Lancados, some of them were Jews seeking to escape religion persecution, settled along the coast, where many of them married women from local communities. All right, keep in mind, we've already went over the color of these Jews. So what would their descendants be? Black as well. Remember, Lancados were Jews, okay? By the early 16th century, Luso-African or Portuguese, as they called themselves, were established at trading centers from Petite Côte in Senegal south to Sierra Leone. Descendants of Portuguese immigrants of Cape Verde Islanders and West Africans, the Luso-Africans, all right? So these Portuguese immigrants from Cape Verde Islands and West African women were called Luso-Africans, and they developed a culture that was itself a synthesis of African and European elements. So let's continue to dig on this. I'm going to start right here. It says the offspring of these Lancados and African women were called Fijos de Terra and were generally considered to be Portuguese. Throughout the 16th century, the descendants of Lancados maintained close commercial ties with Cape Verde Islands. Cape Verdeans were themselves a offspring of mixed Portuguese and West African marriages, all right? So these Sephardim, these black Jews of Portugal, they was coming to West Africa and they was multiplying their seed, basically. They were spreading their seed. Other ways to identify these people when they came into Africa was by the way they built their houses and things like that. So it says the final characteristics that define the Portuguese communities of Senegambia and Guinea was their material culture. All right, their material culture. Luso-Africans were identified by distinctive architecture of their houses. These houses had a vestibule at the entrance, or alternatively were surrounded by a veranda or porch known as an owl painter. The dwellings were rectangular at the exterior walls, were whiting with either a wash of clay or with lime, all right? And they was along the Guinea coast as well as Senegambia during this time. Continuing on, we see that Luso-African religion was actually an amalgam, or excuse me, let me start this over. I'm sorry. Luso-African religion was actually an amalgam of Christian, Jewish, and African practices, all right? Christian, Jewish, and African practices. Among Lancados settled on the Petite Côte in the 16th and early 17th century were Jews and New Christians. All right. So once again, these Lancados, they were Jews and New Christians. Remember, we read the source about the Negroes being converted into new Christians? Right. This is who we dealing with. These Sephardics. Well, basically, we're dealing with their descendants in Africa, all right? Because this is in the 16th and early 17th century. So this is way after they was expelled. But it goes on to say, additionally, new Christians soon arrived in the Petite Côte at Portugal in 1606. Father Berea noted a village of 100 Portuguese who followed the laws of Moses. Some of these Jews had previously lived in Amsterdam and established ties with Dutch merchants. That is important. That is important also because even in the book, The Black Jews of Africa by Tudor Parfit, he mentions that there was a Sephardic Amsterdam. There was a Sephardic congregation or synagogue in Amsterdam, and when it was visited, all of the Jews in there were black. So that would be the same for these Jews that had previously lived in Amsterdam. They were black. The Jewish presence on the Petite Côte gradually diminished after the first quarter of the 17th century. Why? Because of slavery. But Portuguese Christians whose religion was mixed with African culture increased over time. Going to the book real quick, Simba, it tells us that in 1606 in Portugal, also on the Senegalese coast, there were 100 Portuguese following the laws of Moses. It goes on to say that in 1614, the governor of Cape Verde recorded that the greatest number of Lancados were Jews. Just so we don't get confused, family. Just so we don't get confused. So next, we're going to this book right here, sources on the left. And remember, family, you will get all these sources and everything. But it says, in the coast of Guinea are Tango Mas or Lancados or Portugal original. All right, so these Tango Mas, or also known as Lancados, were of Portugal original. So they was from Portugal originally. But they degenerated into barbarous rites and customs, which trade in those parts of hides, ivory, wax, gold, gum, and ambergris. In some places, they are also naked and race like the savages. All right, so that is very interesting. But what we need to learn here is that they were traders. They were in trade. They traded in hides, ivory, wax, gold, and gum. Continuing on to this book right here, In Twisted Tongues, Comparable Creole Literature. It lets us know that the Afro-Portuguese, right? Remember, the Afro-Portuguese or the Black Portuguese, as they are called, right? So the Afro-Portuguese pidgin was forged on the Cape Verde Islands and carried into the coast by Cape Verdean Lancados, all right? So these Jews are also known as Afro-Portuguese, right? Going to the next highlighted section, Afro-Portuguese pidgin along the West African coast is a fantasizing figure, the Lancado or Tango Ma, the European trader working up and down the rivers of the Guinea coast who adopted African religion, custom, and tribal markings. All right. And we always got to chew the meat, spit out the bone, and watch out for the hijack. We know these were not European traders. We know these were black Jewish traders working up and down the rivers of the Guinea coast who adopted African religious customs and evil tribal markings. Very bottom, it says Africans reacted to these Lancados as they did to others. They treated them as guests with whom they could exchange goods and services. All right. They provided that these outsiders accepted local morals. All right. Or morals. It says, so in order to survive in a hostile environment in which he traded, the Lancados took African wives in a correct and manner as they could arrange. All right. So they took these African wives basically to make it easier in the environment they lived in because they were indulging in trade. So now we're going to go to the book, A History of the Upper Guinea Coast, 1545 to the 1800s. It says the Lancados simply could not deploy sufficient force to make their independence a permanent reality. They have built and armed the two garrisons of Cartia and Porto de Cruz entirely at their own expense, but they could not maintain them. By a curious twist, the Portuguese artillery had to be used to defend themselves against the Befidas and from the attacks against the Behojos. So these Sephardic Jews, these Lancados, When they was in Africa, they was getting attacked by slave raiders such as the Bihogos. When these intensified at the beginning of the 17th century, and both Portuguese and Bahamas had to flee from the foreshore of the Rio Grande de Buba. All right, so they were getting attacked by these Bihojo slave raiders, and they had to flee from the foreshores they was located. Learning more, we see that where we're going to start at. We're going to start up top. It says that experienced traders, because remember, these Jews were traders, they learned to assist the arrangements made with the Africans were sworn on some medicine. There was a special ceremony practiced by the Bonhans and the Papals of the river Kochi. Firstly, the blood of a dog was offered for their exena or the exena. Then 2 chickens were made to sink to the bottom of the river by tying rocks to their legs. And finally, a oath was sworn. All right, so this is the things you have to do in order to even indulge with some of these African kings. More than likely, these were those Hamitic tribes that they were dealing with. It goes on to say, for their security, the Lancados on the Kachu had this oath repeated annually. So these Sephardic Jews, or these descendants of the Sephardics, the Lancados, also had to do this. Oath as well, just as everybody else. It goes on to say whether the Afro-Portuguese relationship is to be called that of the host and the guest partnership or contact. The fact remained that the Lancados had to recognize the laws of the land and that the will of the sovereignty of the local rulers. So although they were Jews, although they was royal Negroes from Spain and Portugal, when they was exiled to Africa, they had to follow the laws of the land. They had to follow the sovereignty of the local rulers. The latter half of the 16th century was a period of crisis for the Afro-Portuguese, right? The Afro-Portuguese or the Lancados, understanding on the Upper Guinea coast, during which the Lancados made strenuous attempts to change the nature of the agreements and to escape in one way or another from the authority of the African rulers. So these people were being oppressed by the African rulers when they came into Africa. So you think they weren't being sold into the slave trade as well? Come on now. It goes on to say, when the Lancados violated local taboos, they were subjected to fines, and they claimed that every pretext was used to mulch them. All right. So even these people were subjected to fines and things of that sort. It says some of the Africans themselves were open to the same kind of exploitation, with the vital differences that they suffered slavery as a consequence. So even these Lancados suffered slavery as a consequence of violating the local taboos. Another example of the severity of the ruthlessness introduced by the slave trade is seen in the treatment of the debtors. So here we have it. These people came in and they were oppressed. But we're going to see what else they did. We see that they traded in gold. They traded in gold, ivory, and things of that sort. We're also going to see that they traded in slaves. That's one of the big things that our people had a problem on. Oh, they had slaves. They're not our people. Well, the Khan had slaves. The Igbos had slaves. The Bantus had slaves. The Gas had slaves. I can name off all the people that had slaves. But what does that mean? Does that mean they're not our people? I think not. A history of the Upper Guinea coast is what we're going to next. It says that the manual also had further threats in the store for the Lancados, who were already on the Guinea coast or on the coast in large numbers. So these Jews were on the coast in large numbers. On the 15th of March, 1518, he commissioned Bernardino Gomez to sail to Guinea to superintend the removal of the Lancados. So they were sailing down here to Guinea to try to remove these Lancados. Those who returned to Europe will be pardoned, although half of their goods will be confiscated. All right, so why would these people be returning back to Europe if they weren't from there? That's because we were dealing with the Sephardic Jews who took on the byword Lancado, who took on the byword Afro-Portuguese, who took on the byword Creole. It goes on to say, and each would be made to contribute 10 cruzados to all the saints' hospital in Lisbon. Those who refuse to embark for Europe should be executed by the local kings. Right? Did we just read that? Talking about how they was oppressed by the African kings. Now these Europeans are going to execute these Jews or these Lancados to the African kings or to the local kings who refuse to embark back to Europe. Gomez was instructed to offer the African rulers the goods of the Lancados and whatever gifts were necessary to assure the complicity in this matter. Come on now. That's very interesting. We jump into this book right here, Ngumi, The History of Western Mandi or Mandinka State through the 18th Century. It says initially the Luso-African descendants of Lancados, all right, so Luso-Africans are descendants of the Lancados or the Jews, all right, so the Luso-Africans are the descendants of these Jews and local Africans, then augmented after the mid-17th century by Anglo and Franco-Africans, and augmented too by the African commercial auxiliaries who adopted aspects of the Euro-African way of life. The Euro-Africans were what Rodney calls cultural hybrids. It goes on to say, on the one hand, they retained such outward elements of their European backgrounds as a Creole, Portuguese language, dress, and religion. On the other, their mothers or grandmothers were integrated into the Mandinka culture complex. All right, so you even had some of these Sephardic Jews dwelling amongst the Mandinka. You had some of these Sephardic Jews in the Mandinka culture, in the Mandinka land. You've had Mandinkas and Sephardic Jews in the slave trade together, right? And even you had some of these people basically getting slaves together. It goes on to say many who called themselves Portuguese were indistinguishable to Europeans from the Mandinkas among them who they lived. So these so-called Jews were black Africans and looked like Mandinkas. It goes on to say many of the Luso-Africans who were rosaries consulted Muslim adversaries and healers. Some African slaves or some owned African slaves. So some of these Lancados, some of these Luso-Africans owned African slaves. Yet some were slaves of Africans, all right? Yet some were slaves of Africans. So although they had slaves, they were caught up in the slave trade as well. And we're going to see them in the diaspora later. So let's continue on. Now we're about to get into the Sephardic slaves and the Sephardic traders. The Sephardic slaves and the Sephardic traders. We're about to get into the diaspora. Let me go back real quick. But before we get into that, we're about to deal with the Ladinos. All right. We're about to deal with the Ladinos. We're about to watch a quick video reference to the Ladinos and let the brother explain who they are.
Yes.
What's the language of Cape Verde?
Cape Verde. In Cape Verde, the language in Cape Verde, we call it Creole. Creole is an ancient language. Let me say, for all the Latin-speaking countries in the world, this Latin language, Creole, what we call Creole in West Coast Africa, is the oldest Latin language in the world. A lot of people don't know about this, but it starts in Cape Verde Islands. Creole, we call it Creole. Like you say, when you're in America, you call it Latinos. But the Latinos, this derived from Ladinos, the ancient Israelites, from Israel, from North Africa, and then after persecution of the empires that come to North Africa, like in Eritrea, in Ethiopia, and North Africa, Libya, Morocco, Tunisia, all those places, even Portugal, Spain, Italy, we leave to this kind of islands that we call now Cape Verde Islands on the west coast of Africa because they persecute us, they want to kill us. We leave. We live there. But our originality, we come from Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, all those places, Israel, the ancient Israel, not the Israel that we see now.
What's the religion there? This is the last question.
Uh-huh.
What's the main religion? Are you guys reading? Are you Muslim? Are you Christian? What are the people of Cape Verde? Because there's a lot of you guys in
Yeah.
Boston.
Mhm.
So what? I mean, I know
We,
that's
we, we, we we are, what I tell you, from ancient time.
yeah.
We come from the ancient Israelites.
Okay.
And after that, they colonized us in Cape Verde in 1640. The Portuguese, they colonized us. And
Portuguese
Portuguese
colonized.
colonized
Oh,
us.
okay.
And Portuguese colonization means Roman Empire. It means Rome, Christian. We are Christians there. But still we're using the old.
So, like the brother said, those Sephardic Jews that came out of Spain and Portugal, they were also known as Ladinos. Him himself is a Ladino. He gave you the history of how they were exiled to the Cape Verde Islands, right? And that they are indeed descendants of the ancient Israelites. So when we deal with Ladinos or Ladinos, we're dealing with melanated peoples, as you just saw, and we're dealing with the ancient Israelites. Also, notice that the darker brother, or the other brother, stated that there's a lot of these Cape Verdeans in Boston, right? That's because they were coming in as free Negroes later on in the years, but we'll get into that later on. But like I said, Ladinos, we're dealing with the Sephardic Jews. But notice the hijack here. Black Ladinos were Hispanicized Black Ladinos expelled to Spanish America after having spent time in Spain. So the question is, who were these so-called blacks or these Ladinos expelled from Spain? It goes on to say they were referred to as Negros Ladinos, all right, opposed to Negros Bozels, all right. It says skills granted them a higher price than those of Brazils. Black Ladinos were born in the Americas, were Negro Creoles. All right, so these Ladinos that were born into America, these Sephardic Jews, basically that were born in America under the slavery, was known as Creoles or Creole blacks or Creoles of color. Going to this book right here, Simba, real quick, it tells us that. Where should we start? Other references to Portuguese or Iberian Jews sometimes use the term Ladino to note the social group which constituted a portion of early migrants to the Cape Verde Islands. All right. It also says other references use this term for the people and the language of the 16th and 17th century Sephardic Jews from the Iberian Peninsula. Especially these included those Ladinos who sought refuge in Turkey at this time. So again, when we talking about Ladinos, Black Ladinos, we're talking about these Sephardic Jews. When we're talking about Creoles, we're talking about these Sephardic Jews. These are all bywords and proverbs put on these people after their exile. So we just recovering, or we just covering the tracks, basically. So again, we see that Spaniards refer to these blacks as mulattoes as either black and mulattoes as either Creoles or Ladinos. All right. They say that the latter term having been used in Spain to refer to Muslims and Jews who mastered the Castilian language or who were Hispanicized to the point that they could not be distinguished from authentic Spaniards. All right. That's what we just read from Wikipedia, that these blacks were Hispanicized. These blacks were Christianized, right? Remember who was converted to Christianity. Remember who these new Christians were. Coming from the Islamic slave revolts of Bahia, Brazil. It says, first it was the Christianized blacks from Portugal and Spain who made up the first African ship to Bahia. So who was these early black ships from Spain in the 1500s? These were the Sephardic Jews. These blacks were called Ladinos or Latinized blacks or Christianized blacks. Right? Remember what the brother just told us, that he is a Ladino and that the Ladinos were exiled from Spain and Portugal and that they were Jews. They were ancient Israelites. So again, those early peoples in the Americas known as Black Ladinos, these were actually Sephardics that were not sent to Western Africa, that were sent directly to the Americas. right? Remember that it was the black Jews of Spain and Portugal who became Christianized or new Christians. These are who we dealing with, these black Latinos. It was the first, well, first it was the Christianized blacks from Portugal and Spain. Or let me change that. First, it was the Christianized Jews from Portugal and Spain who made up the first so-called Africans shipped to Bahia, Brazil. Negro slaves and rebels in the Spanish possessions 1503 to 1558. As early as 1501, the Spanish crown, in instructions given to the third governor of Hispaniola, Nicolas, authorized the passage of Indies of Negro slaves that had been Christianized. All right, that had been Christianized. Right, this is the early 1500s. Remember what's going on here? The Inquisition, the conversion of these Jews into Christianity, these so-called Negro Jews. This permission to introduce Negros Latinos or Spanish-speaking Negroes from the Iberian Peninsula, all right, was withdrawn in 1503 when Ovando reported that the Negroes fled their servitude and corrupted the Indians. How did they corrupt the Indians? By showing them Judaism, by showing them Jewish customs, Jewish laws, Jewish traditions. So again, as this says, in 1501, they was bringing Negro slaves that had been Christianized, specifically Negro Latinos from the Iberian Peninsula, from Spain and Portugal. They was bringing these black Sephardic Jews. Remember, these people were exiled, and these people names literally were changed to Ladinos, to Black Portuguese, to Creoles, to Lacados, Luso-Africans. The name changed wherever they went. New World labor systems, African slavery. European colonizing the Americas in the 16th and 17th century frequently brought enslaved and free African laborers with them, drawn from pre-existing trading relationships in West and Central Africa. It goes on to say, in addition, many early Africans in the Americas came from African port cities evolved in European trade and later transatlantic trade, known as the Atlantic Creoles. Remember, the Latinos also were known as the Creoles or the Atlantic Creoles. These Africans had prior exposure to Europeans, such as the Portuguese, who had been trading and settling along the African coast since the 15th century. Some Atlantic Creoles had even lived in Europe. All right. So what were these so-called Atlantic Creoles doing living in Europe? These were Sephardic Jews. For example, Portuguese settlers in African port cities often adapted their Iberian culture to West African context, and they became known as Lancados. All right. These were Jews, remember? Remember, the source said the greatest number of the Lancados were Jews. And these were those that was coming to America as well. It says the offspring of Portuguese and African sexual relations and intermarriages, who then permitted settlements in African regions, became known as Euro-Africans. All right. And just so we don't get confused with this word Euro-African, we're going to get a quick source from it from the passing of the Great Race. All right. Euro-African. What is a Euro-African? It came on the scene known as the Mediterranean race, was first defined by Sergi, who also calls it the Euro-African. The Mediterranean race originated in Africa and is closely related to the Negro, both being long-skulled people descended from a common stock, the Euro-African. All right, so these so-called Euro-Africans are nothing more but Negroes, people of Mediterranean race, as they said it, who were closely related to the Negro, both being of long-headed people descended from a common stock. So Euro-Africans are nothing but black people, right? So don't get thrown off by that word. It says, from this prior exposure to African and European influences, African or Atlantic Creoles in the Americas often spoke multiple languages, right? Weren't the Jews very fluent in multiple languages? Practiced Christianities infused with African religious traditions and even Islam. Didn't we just read that they were doing the same thing in the west coast of Africa when they came in there, practicing Christianity and Africa in a mix of African religions, and they even started to get African tribal markings and had experience working with Europeans as interpreters, sellers, merchants, and traders. These were black people. these so-called Atlantic Creoles who were actually descendants of Sephardics. When slave traders forced them into when slave traders forced them into early American labor system, Atlantic Creoles could use their familiarity with European customs to negotiate the terms of their status more easily than later enslaved arrivals from the African interior. In this way, a significant number of enslaved Atlantic Creoles in the Americas obtained their freedom, married, and had children born into freedom, all right, and became property owners, farmers, and even slaveholders, right? They became free. They had freeborn children. They became property owners, farmers, and even slaveholders, all right? Stay tuned. Get into this word Creole one more time. By the 17th century, mixed free race Louisianans made up a substantial part of the population. All right. It goes on to say these Creoles of color, as they were known, occupied a middle group between whites and enslaved blacks. They commonly owned property, including slaves, and received formal education, sometimes in Europe. It's very important. It goes on to say in antebellum 19th century, black, white, and mixed race Louisiana natives continued to use Creole in reference to themselves. The term distinguished native-born persons from increasing numbers of immigrants hailing from overseas. Let's see. It goes on to say, but with the coming of the Civil War, the end of slavery, the subsequent collapse of the South's economic, white Louisianans gradually took away the privileged status that set Creoles of color apart from formerly enslaved black Creoles. All right, so these black Creoles, these black Sephardics were actually enslaved. But we're going to bring out more proof of that later on, so stick around. By the 1890s, no middle group remained in the mixed ethnic group. As one historian has observed, Creoles of color were left with nothing but their sense of group identity and noxional for halcyon times, although they now occupied the same social stratum as former slaves. All right, notice how they keep making distinctions between these so-called Creoles or Creoles of color and these so-called African-born slaves. Because remember, they knew that these people were from Portugal. They knew that these Creoles were from Spain. They knew that these people were Jews during this time. So it says Creoles of color continue to hold themselves apart and distinct from blacks. They did so, for example, through the practice of ignominy, marriage within the ethnic group. So even these Sephardics in the Americas, they married amongst themselves, or Creoles rather. Now we're going to get into this book, Atlantic Africa and the Spanish Caribbean, all right? Because this is basically going to bring together everything I've been saying, all these names, Atlantic Creole, Ladinos, Luso-African, right? We've already proved that these were the names of Jews just in certain locations, right? Or rather, we proved that these were the names of these Sephardic Jews in these different locations. But this book is going to like pinpoint these together a little bit more. So where shall we start? It says, matter of fact, let's start right here. Sustained exposure to Portuguese culture transformed some coastal African communities, producing multilingual and knowledgeable individuals such as those identified by Ira Berlin as Atlantic Creoles. We just went over these Atlantic Creoles, right? Who were in early colonial America, who would have been known in Africa as Luso-Africans, context as Ladinos. So in Africa, these Creoles, right? They would have been known as Luso-Africans or Ladinos. Remember, the Luso-Africans are descendants of Sephardics and black women, or African women, and so are the Ladinos. So the Creoles would be the same thing, the Atlantic Creoles. Continuing on, we're going to start right here where it says, despite and in large part of because their direct participation in enslavement and displacement of African captives, Tango Mas or Luso-Africans entered the Caribbean having experienced social proximity to Africans and cultural exchange that would have been foreign to most passengers arriving directly from Iberia on in these fleets. Although much of their knowledge was used to further their own interests, even Portuguese and Luso-African immigrants who grew wealthy through slave trafficking continued to show signs of their familiarity with Africans and African cultures. All right. So this is what a lot of people was commenting on or commenting in this comment section. How can these Jews be our people if they were enslaved? Or rather, how can these people be our people? Or how can these Jews be the same with us if they was practicing this slave trafficking? We're going to continue to read and figure out how. Or why are they our people? Or how do we know they're our people? It says in settlements throughout the Spanish Caribbean, individuals described as Portuguese blacks or Afro-Portuguese Creoles worked alongside diasporic Africans as fellow slaves and free people of color. That's why we know they are people. Because in settlements throughout the Spanish Caribbean, individuals described as Portuguese blacks or Afro-Portuguese Creoles worked alongside diasporic Africans. Remember, these Sephardim was expelled to Africa and they was known as what? The Black Portuguese or the Portuguese blacks or the Afro-Portuguese. It literally just let us know that they was working alongside other Africans in the diaspora. That's how we know they are people, because they were so right with you. It goes on to say other slave ship travelers were Luso-Africans, individuals of Iberian ancestry who were born or lived for extended periods in Western Africa, or people of African or African Iberian descent, born and raised in Iberian societies in Africa. The latter were usually described as Portuguese blacks, Portuguese mulattoes, Black Creoles of Cape Verde, right? We know these Cape Verdeans were Jews, Sephardic Jews, or Black Creoles of Sao Tome. These are all Black Jews. So when we dealing with these people known as Creoles, Black Portuguese in the diaspora, we're talking about these Sephardics. Going over here, it says in 1612, two Portuguese bystanders diffused a plot because they knew the language of Angola and overheard several Africans and Afro-Creoles allegedly discussing plans for the reforming of a rebellion among Mexico City Black and mulatto population. So even the Sephardics and so-called Africans, right? We know that they were Israelites, but so-called Sephardics and other Israelites were all the way down in Mexico teaming up about to make a rebellion. It goes on to say that although deeply implicated in the commodification and trafficking of enslaved Africans, Portuguese and Luso-African immigrants also selectively adopted sub-Saharan African customs more thoroughly than any other segment of Spanish Caribbean society, accepting sub-Saharan Africans as themselves. Why would they do that? Why would they do that? And shout out to Dietrich. That's facts. Other Jews enslaved Bruce in Jeremiah 34. We shouldn't be surprised on seeing Israelites enslaving Israelites because we saw that in the Bible. Right? Notice Judah was the first person to sell his brother. Judah was the first person to sell his brother into slavery. But notice here, it says that these Luso-Africans, right, these Sephardic Jews, they adopted African customs. And they even saw sub-Saharan Africans as themselves. Why would they do that? Because they were black just like them? Because they was brethren? It goes on to say, like the go-betweens who facilitated Iberian interaction with Brazil's indigenous populations during the same area, Portuguese and Luso-African intermediaries played an ambiguous yet significant role in the colonization of the Spanish Caribbeans. It goes on to say, in addition, the cross-cultural exchange in Upper Guinea preceding Spanish colonization of the Caribbean and Portuguese colonization of Angola, reinforcing Spanish expansion in the Americas, the presence of Tango Mas and Luso-Africans in the Spanish Caribbean reveals the social order taking shape there during the late 16th and early 17th centuries was in many ways an extension of the great quantity of Portuguese who have arrived via Guinea and the Bar Lovington Island and gathered up all money of the city's province through slave trading. All right. And remember, I brought out all these other names and stuff they were brought by in the beginning. so we don't be confused when we talking about Luso Africans or Creoles or all these other names that they are known by. We should know off top that these are Jews or descendants of those Sephardics. But by the dawn of the 17th century, following the unprecedented surge in the transatlantic slave trafficking during the 1590s, Carthagena's highest ranking authorities had come to view the slave trade as the city's primary source of income. In response to the royal directives to purge the city of all foreign elements, especially Portuguese Judaizers. All right, so that's just letting us know that these Portuguese Jews made their way to Cartagena by way of the slave trade because what? They were trying to purge out these Portuguese Judaizers because they did not want them practicing their religion. Goes on to say the largest and most important commerce of the city is that of slaves who come from Guinea and Angola. And since these are princes or provinces of the Portuguese crown, nearly everyone involved is Portuguese. Let me read that again. The largest or most important commerce of this city is that of the slaves who come from Guinea and Angola. Remember, Sephardic and Portuguese Jews were expelled to Guinea and Angola, right? It goes on to say, and since these provinces of the Portuguese crown, everyone or nearly everyone involved is Portuguese, that would mean the slaves were Portuguese as well. Portuguese Jews. This is why we see back here, they were trying to purge out Portuguese Judaizers. It goes on to say that according to Zarzo, without relatives or friends of the same nation in Cartagena, people of credit who can take charge of newly arrival slaves, Lisbon's elites, will hesitate to invest in the slave trade for many of the Caribbean's long-term Portuguese and Luso-African residents. However, the slave traffic was ultimately a mechanism for migration. Portuguese migrants in the 1600s census for Havana, Santa Marta, and also Venezuela had integrated themselves into Spanish Caribbean economic under diverse circumstances. It says many likely arrived on slave ships. It says many of these people more than likely arrived on slave ships. Such was the case for Coro resident Diego Lopez, who came with a boatload of blacks. Goes on to say, in Cartagena, the flow of Portuguese migrants apparently never abated during the early 17th century. A second slave trade surge lasting from the late 1610s through the first half of the 1620s brought even a larger number of Portuguese and Luso-Africans to the city. Who are these Portuguese and Luso-Africans? These were descendants of Sephardic Jews. All right, these were descendants of Sephardic Jews. And we talking about Mexico right here, Cartagena, Mexico. I believe it's Mexico. Fact check me on that, if that's Mexico, family. But next source was we're going to be reading from is Atlantic History. It's about to get deep. It says right here, but by the early 17th century on the Senegambian coast in West Africa and in Suriname during the latter half of the 18th century, a sizable Jewish Euro-African subgroup arose in the latter case. Perhaps 10% of the population confessing Jews, legal recognition as such by the colonial government and by the communal leaders. These Jewish Euro-Africans illustrate that African spiritual traditions, Christianity, and Islam were not the only were not the only possibilities available to Africans and their free or enslaved descendants. Hold on. Let me start this again. But by the early 17th century, on the Senegambia coast in West Africa, and in Suriname, Jamaica, or West Indies, during the later half of the early 18th century, a sizable Jewish Euro-African subgroup arose in the later case. Perhaps 10% of the population confesses Jews, legally recognized as such. Right? They were legally recognized as such. These were Euro-Africans. These were black Jews who were recognized as such by the colonial government and by Jewish communal leaders. It says these Jewish Euro-Africans illustrated that African spiritual traditions, Christianity, Islam, were not the only possible availables, or were not the only possibilities available to Africans and their free or enslaved descendants. So that right there letting us know that these Luso-Africans were enslaved and they were free. They were enslaved and they were free. So these Euro-Africans were nothing but descendants of these Sephardic Jews once more. Going to this book right quick, Merchants of Caracal in the early 18th century, just to show you all some colored merchants, basically some colored merchants, and these colored merchants more than likely were of the Sephardic family. These colored merchants were more than likely of the Sephardic family. But it says slaves on Caracal generally did not exclusively perform a specialized profession or craft. The slave slaves who labored in the salt plants or the salt pans also worked on the land and may have been used as artisans, bricklayers, and carpenters. It should be noted that in the 18th century Caracal, there were colored merchants and slave owners. Right? These were more than likely those of the Sephardic Jews. It goes on to say it would be wrong to think that slave owners during the entire period of slavery in the West Indies were definitively white, right? Because we knew that these Sephardic Jews were coming here as well as free persons, not only as slaves, but as free persons, and they were merchants. Now we're about to get into how these people were actually involved or sold into the slave trade. Healing in the homeland is what we'll be going to next, all right? Healing in the homeland is what we will be going to next. All right. And of course, we're not afraid to read nothing. We're not afraid to read what the literature says. It says the early Spanish slave trade may have been half white and half black. We know that's false, right? We got to chew the meat, spit out the bone, and watch the hijack, because they said that because they said what was next right here. They said that Jewish captives in the continuing war against the Moorish cities and Muslim slaves were sold in a Valencia market, all right? Jewish captives in the continuing war against Moorish cities and Muslim slaves were sold in a Valencia market, right? Who are these so-called Jewish captives in these Moorish cities? We know the Moorish cities was in Spain and Portugal. We know these Jewish captives in Spain and Portugal were black. So that's why I say we got to chew the meat and spit out the bone and watch out for the hijacks in all these books. It says this may account for Jews and Africans sold in the slave markets in the early years before the Spanish invasion of the New World. Let me read that again. This may account for Jews and Africans sold in the slave markets in the early years before the Spanish invasion of the New World. So Jews and Africans were sold in the slave markets together. Just like we read before that it was Africans and Afro-Portuguese in the slave trade or in the plantations together working side by side, right? Because the Afro-Portuguese were nothing but the Sephardic Jews. We see the same thing here. Jews and Africans sold in the slave markets in the early years before the Spanish invasion. Continuing on though, it says, although many Jews were slaves with Africans in the African market, it says that although many Jews were slaves with Africans in the Spanish market, all right? Just letting us know once again that Jews were indeed enslaved with these Africans from West Africa. For example, Christian law did not permit Jews to have Christians as slaves, although many Jews were slaves with Africans. Continuing on. At that time, Jews purchased from the slave markets were taken to Haiti. Matter of fact, let me start at the very top. Because so we get some understanding. The European Christians arrived in 1492, already accustomed to slavery. What happened in 1492? We read it already. These Jews were expelled from Spain and Portugal, sent to West Africa. Some were sold as slaves, right? Right? Remember, it kept saying some were sold as slaves. This is what we're dealing with. The European Christians arrived in 1492 already accustomed to slavery because they was enslaving these Jews. As described above, and the cold-blooded enslaved the indigenous peoples who lived on the island. It says that at the beginning of the conquest, every Spaniard was allowed to take with him an enslaved person from his European community. and the numbers rose later with 20 enslaved people per Spaniard. At that time, Jews were purchased from the slave market and taken to Haiti. All right, at that time, Jews were purchased for slaves or purchased from the slave market and taken to Haiti. So y'all wanted proof that these people were sold into slavery with us. I don't gave y'all 6 references in a row. Those Afro-Portuguese, those Creoles, those Luso-Africans that were enslaved, those were Sephardic Jews. All right. If you have Afro-Portuguese descent, if you have Creole descent, right? If you know that your family come from Creoles, if you know that your family were known as Afro-Portuguese, then you more than likely may be a descendant of these Sephardic Jews. We're going to go to Delaware's Forgotten Folk. All right, Delaware's Forgotten Folk. In 711 AD, the Moors crossed the Straits of Gibraltar and began their conquest on the Spanish Peninsula. It was during these conquests that many were captured, and their descendants sold to the slave traders who brought them to shackles in America. Hold on. It was during these conquests that many captives and their descendants sold to the slave traders who brought them to shackles in America. Now, the funny thing is about this, we know that the Moors ended up going into Northern Africa. We know that the Moors ended up selling some of the Jews as slaves as well. So who are we talking about here? We're talking about the Moorish Jews that was enslaved and taken into Africa, because we know that a good amount of the Moors were Jews. Like it says, these so-called Moors, or what I'm proposing here, the Moorish Jews, their descendants were captured and their descendants were sold to the slave traders who brought them to the Americas, right? Who brought them to the Americas. And to even more bring this, or to even more show proof of this, or to question this, could this be why we see temples coming up in the Americas, such as the Moors Zionist temple of the Moorish Jews? Right? Because we know that some of our ancestors in Spain and Portugal, although being of Jewish or Hebrew Israelite origin or descent, they were also Muslims or Moors. So could this be why we see temples or congregations popping up, such as the Moorish Zionist temple of the Moorish Jews? Because like the source just said, the Moors, or some of these Moors, were captured and their descendants were brought and sold into the slave trade in America. But like I said, I'm saying that these were the Moorish Jews, or those Moors that were Jews. The untold story, all right? The untold story. The Black Jews went to Portuguese colonial possessions in the Western Africa, which were Guinea, Sao Tome, Senegal, Angola, and a few islands near the African coast. It is certain that many Black Jews of Portugal, Sao Tome, Angola, who became victims of the Inquisition and Portuguese persecution, were sold into the slave trade. All right, I just showed you that. This Atlantic slave trade lasted more than 400 years, from 1444 to about the 1800s in various parts of South America. All right, so these Sephardics were sold in the slave trade, whether they was under the name Ladino, Luso-African, Creole, or Black Portuguese. Those are the Sephardic Jews' prosperity. All right. So now that we've got that out the way, let's get into some examples of these people in Africa. All right, so let's get into the DNA of these people. Excuse me, not DNA. I'm looking at the comment section. But let me get into some examples of these peoples in the diaspora. First place we jump into is Jamaica. All right, Jamaica in 1850. All right, we dealing with Jamaica in 1850. It says Kingston contains about 40,000 inhabitants at present, 9/10 of whom are at least of color. In walking the streets, one scarcely meets white persons as frequently as he would meet colored persons in New York City. The whites are most English or English descent. All right, so notice he said that the whites are most English or English descent. He didn't say that they were Jews, right? He didn't say that they was Jewish. He didn't say that the whites were Sephardics. He didn't say that the whites were Ashkenazim. He said they was English or English descent. But notice what he says about the Jews. The portion of the Jews of all colors is fearfully great. I had never seen a black Jew before. I was astonished to find how little the expression of the Israelite profile was affected by color. My imagination could never have combined the sharp coming feature of Isaac with the thick-lipped, careless, unthinking countenance of Cujo. But the nature has done it perfectly. If that can be called a combination in which the Negro furnishes the color of the Jew, all the rest of the expression. So this author, right, John Bigelow, visited Jamaica, 1850, saw the descendants of the Jews, and says that they were black, right? Saw black Jews in Jamaica, right? We told you the Sephardic Jews were black. More than likely, these are who he was seeing, these Sephardic Jews. Nature knows no color line, bringing another source to that. It says, so dark. Matter of fact, I'm going to start right here. It says, many of the Jews who were banished from Portugal by John II, right, settled in West Indies. We covered how they settled in Western Africa, but now we're seeing that some of them settled in West Indies. John Bigelow, who visited Jamaica in 1850, saw the descendants of these Jews and says that they were Negroes. So here, once again, those who were expelled from Spain and Portugal and their children, they were Negroes, they were black, they were not white. For those who were commenting that in the section, or who were commenting this under the videos, these people were indeed Negroes. Another example is El Raro Casa de Yosef Nasi. This is coming from a Spanish Jewish website. All of this is in Spanish, but guess what? I'll leave a link for you all. All you got to do is copy and paste, put it into Google Translate. Boom, you got all the information you need. But this is the sum of what was found in this article. This is the man that we're looking for. This is a Sephardic Jew. His name is Joseph Nasi. This picture was taken in Belgium in the 1900s. Look at this man. This is a Sephardic Jew. The key things to take out of this was that his father was a Sephardic Jew. He was a native of Suriname, and he was born in Suriname, Jamaica in 1904. He moved to San Francisco and lived there for a while, and he later moved to Belgium, Germany. And the funny thing is, he was in Germany during the time of the Holocaust. And it mentioned within this article that he was possibly the only black Jew to survive Hitler. All right. So this is very important to basically know. Right. Joseph Nasi, one of the only one of the only black Jews to survive Hitler. Right. So next we jump into the book, The Soul of Judaism. Right. The Soul of Judaism. We finna keep bringing this fire out. We finna keep bringing this history out regarding these black Sephardic Jews in the diaspora. All right. Because the history of these people has been told, has been absolutely stolen, whitewashed, everything. All right. But I've been in touch with a community in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, where I am told that there are nearly 200,000 Brazilians who the fathers is Jewish and the mother is African, of African descent. All right, these are called black Brazilians. Didn't we tell y'all these Sephardic Jews were mixing with black people, with our black people? Basically, I guess we would say how the Europeans say it with African slaves, but what we call them Israelite slaves. It ain't nothing but Judah and Israel mixing over again. The Sephardic Jews being Judah, right? And Israel being the so-called Africans coming out of Western Africa, who they were mixing with. Black Sephardic Jewish fathers and black African mothers. There were nearly 200,000 of these black Brazilians who had these Jewish fathers. Now, before I move on, I'm about to go and show you all a video of a so-called descendants of these black Sephardic Jews in Brazil. And of course, he's going to be speaking in Brazilian. Fortunately, I was able to get somebody to translate some of this for me. We're going to read some of what he said throughout this video. But just listen. You can hear some of the words he's saying, such as Negro, Moses, Limba, Israelite, things like that you can peep on if you know Spanish or Brazilian or Portuguese, rather. But after we watch this video, we're going to read some of the things he said.
pouco se fala sobre a ancestralidade do povo negro. Você sabia que existem judeus negros e brasileiros? Pois é, a gente vai ouvir hoje a história do nosso amigo Raiz Editon, que vai contar essa história maravilhosa pra gente. Porque aqui, gente, no Cult na TV, o povo fala.
Que Xalu saúde seus povos, já o eterno de Moisés seja convosco. A minha ancestralidade eu sou bisneto de Esté Mohamed Aleixo, família Aleixo que veio disso para o Brasil durante isso, a escravatura. Família direta, isso é descendência de Moisés, isso, pertencente à tribo de Levi, tribo sacerdotal e isso, do povo de Israel. Vocês sabiam que a base do judaísmo é africana? E vocês sabiam que Moisés era negro? Então, isso é a verdadeira face do judaísmo é africano. E Moisés era negro. E hoje eu estou contando para vocês um pouco disso dessa história. Um pouco disso da base pilar e principal do judaísmo. Isso, através disso, da minha ancestralidade. Isso, eu, Raizeste Shelomo, Dias Aleixo, pertencente à família dos Lemba, os Lembas que é o povo de Araão, irmão de Moisés, da tribo de Levi, tribo sacerdotal. A única tribo a única tribo e pertencente à tribo sacerdotal. E, por coincidência, a tribo de negros. Eram todos negros. Então, na história do povo de Israel.
All right, I'll leave a link to the bio, or I'll leave a link to that video with this video in the bio. But I know it was hard to understand. I'm pretty sure y'all understood some of the words that he said, but shout out to the person that was able to translate some of this for me. You know who you are. Appreciate that dearly. But to sum up what he says, he stated that I am the great grandson of Esther Muhammad Alizo, family Alizo, who were sent to Brazil during the slavery. The direct family descendant of Moses, belonging to the tribe of Levi, priestly tribe of the people of Israel. You knew that the basis of Judaism is African. This is easy. Judaism is African and Moses was black. And today I'm telling you a little bit of the story, a little of the pillar and main base of Judaism through my specialty, I.S. these days, Alisi, belonging to the family of legends of the book and the people of Aaron, brother of Moses, of the tribe of Levi, priestly tribe, the only tribe among belonging to the priestly tribe, and coincidentally, the tribe of blacks were all black then in the history of the people of Israel, all priests, the priestly dynasty, and the people of Israel is black. There is no priest of the people of white Israel, but they're all black. Now, if anybody can get this better translated for me, please do, and just email it to me or just comment it under one of my videos for me. That'd be great. But like he said, he is a descendant of Jews that were sent to Brazil during slavery, right? But continuing on, we're going to bring some more information out on these Jews in Brazil. But first, let's jump to Jamaica. All right, let's jump to Jamaica. Jamaica with Jewish family names. This is coming from the Times of Israel. Starting in the highlighted section, it says, yet the island's Jewish heritage mysteriously survives in the family of names of the black-skinned inhabitants. Why would the Jewish heritage survive in the family name of black-skinned inhabitants? That's because the black-skinned inhabitants had the name since they got over there. That's because the black-skinned inhabitants are the descendants of the Sephardim Jews that went to Jamaica. This leads him to believe that Jamaicans with names such as Levy, Cohen, DaCosta, DeSouza, and even his own name, Henriquez, must have some Jewish heritage, even if they do not know about it, all right? Even if they do not know about it. Because we know a lot of times these people ended up in slavery. These people ended up, in the rest of the system with the other, I guess you can say, Africans or Israelite family that didn't have the, the prosperity or the rights that these Sephardics did in the colonial America, but these Sephardics actually had, they was of a different class, as we can say. As we were reading about the Creoles earlier, the Creoles didn't even mix with other blacks, right? They mixed amongst themselves in America. This is coming from another article right? It says about 424 modern Jamaicans are said to be descendants from that old Sephardic family. All right, about 424 modern Jamaicans are said to be descendants of that old Sephardic family. Thousands and thousands of Jamaicans immigrated to the United States over the centuries, and many were named Cohen, the largest sources of black Cohens. All right, so we talking about black Jamaicans right here. It says, according to the obituary that ran in the Washington Post in 2011, Mr. Cohen, who was raised Catholic, often had to explain how he acquired his last name, which is typically associated with people of Jewish origin. All right, so just to comment on this, they think people with these last names, they have to automatically get these Jewish last names from white European Jews, when in fact it's the other way around. These white European Jews stole these names from us. But it goes on to say, according to their family lore, the name derived from a group of black Jews who settled in Jamaica, right? Didn't John Bigelow say that the Jews that were expelled to Jamaica from Spain to Portugal were Negroes? This is how we do things here. We pile up these sources with other sources that verify what they're saying to make things more clearer. So when we get to stuff, you know what we're talking about. Like it says, according to the family lore, the name derived from a group of black Jews who settled in America. Who settled in Jamaica. And I also notice up here it says about 424 modern Jamaicans are said to be descendants from that old Sephardic family. That old black Sephardic family. This far by faith. All right. It says recent scholarship indicates that blacks arriving in the United States from the West Indies and South America may have possessed Jewish ancestry. All right. Recent scholarship indicates that blacks arriving in the United States from the West Indies and South America may have possessed Jewish ancestry. Indeed, since the 17th century, Jews from the countries such as Spain and Portugal have been establishing communities in several parts of Latin America and the Caribbean. All right. So once again, these blacks, even when you're dealing with the blacks immigrating from the West Indies to America, a lot of them was Jews or Sephardic Jews, like this just pointed out. Recent scholarship indicates that blacks arriving to the United States possessed Jewish ancestry. These were Sephardic Jews' descendants, these blacks. West Indians in New York City and London, a comparative analysis. All right. It says West Indians were noted in the 1920s and 1930s for their thrift and business acumen. And enough West Indians prospered in New York to anger an American Negro stereotype of them as black Jews. So even the Negroes in America was calling these West Indians, these Jamaicans, these people, these black peoples, these Negroes coming up from the Caribbean, coming up from the West Indians, they were calling them black Jews. Did not just the last source just say that it was blacks arriving from the West Indies that had Jewish ancestry? So our people knew what was going on during this time. All right. These West Indians, a lot of these West Indians Jamaicans that was coming in were Sephardics. All right. Continuing on. Next, we're about to go to this source right here, Africans in the Spanish colonies. We're about to learn something real quick, show y'all how they try to hijack information. It says in Spain's largest city, Seville, free and enslaved Africans congregated in the ethnic clades such as San Bernardero. It goes on to say, as their numbers grew, Isabel and Fernandez named one John de Valladolid, one noble lineage among Negroes. All right. Now, notice they're calling these people Africans. We know that they was Jews. And to prove that, we're going to see that this man named John de Valladolid was a Jew himself. And notice that he was among the noble lineages of Negroes. We see that on another website that he is born Jewish, right? He was born Jewish. He converted to Christianity later in life as a convertio or a baptized Jew, right? He was involved in the Inquisition. He ended up getting converted in the Inquisition. He married a Christian woman named Jamila. Some say he later married a Moorish woman in Fez, but this was just to show that the person they called an African in the last source is actually a Jew, a Sephardic Jew at that the Jews that they tell us is white. Getting into another example of that, Torn Black History by Bay Week. This is coming from Bay Weekly. For Americans in African descent, the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness have not been unalienable. Yet Maryland's first black, right? They say that this is his first black, but we're going to see what he actually was. All right. Yet Maryland's first black, Matthias de Sousa, right? You can already tell off that name what he is. Reached our source in 1634 on the ark, not of a slave ship, an indentured servant. De Sousa earned his freedom in 4 years. Go to the next source, History Emerging MD. This is coming from the Washington Post, where they just outright tell us that Matthias de Sousa was an African Portuguese Jew. He wasn't just an African, right? As this said, he wasn't Maryland's first black. He was Maryland's first African Portuguese Jew, or rather Sephardic Jew. Peep the hijack, because these people, they threw in African in the front, but we knew that they was already black beforehand, right? So Matthias de Sousa, an African Portuguese Jew, arrived in 1634 with Maryland's first European settlers, most of whom were Catholics fleeing the religious intolerance of the old world. And notice he came as an indentured servant. We're going to see that a lot of Jews, Sephardic Jews in particular, were coming in as indentured servants and as slaves. But let's continue to dig. Before we dig, we're just going to verify one more time that Matthias de Sousa was a Jew. And when we're doing that, we're going to look at this newspaper article right here. It says, further, Matthew arose the church. In minutes, he cried, an example must be made of this Jew, for he is the most prominent of his people. We know that Jacob Leah, David Faria, Matthias de Sousa, Matthias de Costa, right? These are all Jewish names. Isaac de Berea, and the dark-eyed Jewish Hester Cordia, the most stubborn of them all, right? So these is basically a list of Jews that are being named off, and Matthias de Sousa was named in this list of Jews, basically just verifying that this so-called African that they called him, he was indeed a Sephardic Jew, not African. Continuing on, let's get into some more information. The Jews of Philadelphia, their history from the earliest settlements to the present time. All right, so we see that a party of 27 Hebrews set sail from a port in the vicinity of Bahia. Remember, we was talking about Bahia earlier, Bahia, Brazil, when the Black Ladinos, aka the Sephardic Jews, were sent there in 1501, bound for what was then called New Amsterdam. So Sephardic Jews left Bahia, and they went to a place called New Amsterdam, which is in New York. This was in the year 1654, and it's the first actual record of a Jewish settlement in these parts that has come to light. Now, this is very important because, like this source just said, this Jewish settlement in New Amsterdam was the actual first recorded of a Jewish settlement in these parts. Now, that is important because if we take it over to this other source right here, Black Jews in America, we see that the first Jew known in America was a Jew of color, and he was in New Amsterdam around this same time. What does it say? 1653. What did this say? 1654. So the same time or around the same time period. But let's read what this source says about this Jew in New Amsterdam or in New York in the 1600s. It says there's a unique tale of one Black Jew only a few years earlier. In the course of time, an occasional Jew did settle in Boston and was apparently unmolested. One such resident was named Solomon, who had bad judgment, traveling towards New Hampshire on a Sunday in 1668. There was no reason. This was no mean offense in a day when men were sentenced to a month in jail if they missed church on Sunday. Solomon's journey did not pass unnoticed, as he was brought before the courts of Auschwitz. The outcome of the case may never be known, but one phrase in the brief court record challenges the attention of the passing reader. Solomon is described as a mulatto Jew. All right, Solomon is described as a mulatto Jew or mulatto Jew, a Jew of color, right? The first Jew living in New England, as far as we know it. All right, so the first Jew living in New England, as far as we know, it was of Negro descent. Go back right here. We see that what within that it was a part of 27 Hebrews who set foot out from Bahia to go to New Amsterdam, New York. And this was in 1654. The same time Solomon was arrested. So the first Jew living in New England, as far as we know it, was of Negro descent. And guess who these people were? These were Sephardic Jews coming from Bahia, Brazil. Come on now. Going back to this source. In the evening company, Mr. Lewis and Mr. Littlepage, I went to Mr. Levy's, a Jew, a very considerable merchant. All right. Remember, I told you all these Jews were merchants. And even in Philadelphia, they were merchants. It goes on to say he was a widower and his sister, Miss Hetty Levy, kept her house. We stayed tea and was very agreeable, entertained by the young lady. She was of middle stature and very well made. Her complexion, black but comely. All right. Didn't the Shulamite woman say the same thing, family? I am black but comely. This is a Jew, y'all. Now, this is Mr. Levy's sister. So if Mr. Levy's sister is black, right, is black but comely, what do you think Mr. Levy is? Mr. Levy got to be black and but comely. If his sister is black, right? Let's just put one and two together. Continuing on, we're going to the Fireman's Magazine, right? The Fireman's Magazine. I will leave a link to the bio on this. This is coming from the Fireman's Magazine of the Brotherhood of the Locomotive Firemen of the United States and Canada. Now, this is important because we get into a story of Judah P. Benjamin. This right here is Judah P. Benjamin. The thing is, he does not look black whatsoever. But that's because his father married a Gentile, which says down here if you continue to read. But we ain't going to read that part. We just reading up here where it says, I heard a fact or two about Judah P. Benjamin, early life the other day, which were new to me. His father was a small, dark-skinned Spanish Jew. All right, his father was a small, dark-skinned Spanish Jew. All right, so this man is the son of a dark-skinned Spanish Jew, of a black Jew. Now, I told you all that these people indulged in slavery some of the times, and these people had slaves, but it wasn't as much as the Europeans. It wasn't as much as the Ashkenazi. In fact, it was a considerable minimal percentage. And even to get on to show you this, why he looks like this, or why he don't even look Negroid. This is even a real picture of Judah P. Benjamin. It says that his father, let's see, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, family, I should have had that highlighted. But it says, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, it's not on this page, but it also goes on to say that Judah P. Benjamin himself went on to marry a Gentile. But again, his father was a dark-skinned Spanish Jew. And I really brought this out just to show that even these Sephardic Jews dealt in slavery sometimes. And to show you that is from this book, Jews and Negro Slavery in the Old South. We're going to read about Benjamin P., right? Judah P. Benjamin. And we see right here is his plantation house, Judah P. Benjamin plantation house, right? He had slaves, and he was a descendant of a black Sephardic Jew. I don't know how many slaves he had. I don't know if he was a prominent slave master. I just know he had slaves and that he was a descendant of a black Sephardic Jew, right? We have to bring out all the history of these people so we're not bombarded by nothing, or we're not caught off guard by nothing. Just like earlier I brought out, and while they was in Africa, they was selling slaves to Africans, and they also were slaves to Africans. So they were enslaved and slaves. Continuing on, let's see. All right, so the Johns Hopkins University Jews of Georgia in colonial times. Now we're about to start to get into some of more of these black Jews in colonial America. Some of the Jewish settlers who came to Georgia within a year or two after original settlements appear to have come from, or at any rate to have been in South America. What we just read, that many blacks coming from that many blacks coming from the West Indies and South America possess Jewish ancestry. Continuing on, we're going to a list of the early settlers of Georgia. We see that Abiradon Haman, or Haman Abiradon, was a Jew and he's an inmate. You see that he fled the colony with his wife and 2 small children for the fear of the Spaniards. We see that Abigail is a Jew and she is a runaway or a maroon or a Marano, right? Isn't that what Marano means or maroon means? Runaway. We see that Solomon is a Jew and he is a runaway. We also see that Simeon or Simone is a Jew and he is an inmate. An inmate. And remember, when we was dealing back with Sao Tome, those Jews were being sent there as inmates. The same thing here with Georgia, right? This is a list of the early settlers in Georgia. You had Jews coming here, settling as inmates and runaways. We just showed you Matthias de Sousa, who was a Sephardic Jew, who was one of the earliest settlers in Pennsylvania, right? Or Pittsburgh, rather. We see more Jews arriving in Georgia, right? More Jews arriving in Georgia. I'm just showing you this so we can build up on what we're about to get into. Bernal Raphael, Jew, arrived July 10th, 1735. Bernal Abraham, Jews, arrived July 10th, 1733. So you had Jews coming over, and these were them of the Sephardic ancestry. Noah Shem, Jew, servant. All right. Noah Costa, Jew, servant. All right, so we had Jews coming over here as servants, inmates, all type of stuff. Now let's get into this. Free blacks and mulattoes in South Carolina. The 1850 census. We see a list full of Cohens. The funny thing is they are all listed off as mulattoes. Now, family, if I'm wrong, correct me. But has anyone ever saw a pure mulatto family? I've never saw a mulatto family. I've never saw a family of 16, 8, 10, 6 mulattoes in it. You might got one mulatto brother here, one mulatto sister here, but you don't have a whole family of mulattoes. So that's what we have to start to understand and when we're digging into this literature. More than likely, these people were pitch black, but they put mulatto because they are Cohen descendants of Sephardic Jews who had the last name Cohen. To your right, we have the DaCostas. Remember what the book told us, that the DaCostas brought in Negro strand. The DaCostas were of Sephardic ancestry. We also see that they were born in Ireland. So these were Sephardic Jews coming from Ireland. Louisa DaCosta, Thomas DaCosta, W.P. or William DaCosta, right? William DaCosta, Henry DaCosta. Remember these DaCostas, right? These are black peoples with Sephardic ancestry within South Carolina. Now we're going to go to a gentleman of color, the life of James Thornton. I'm going to bring this together, what we just reviewed. One by one, the Ham scores allied themselves with Charleston aristocrats of color. All right, so just like the Sephardic Jews, so just like you had aristocrats of Jewry in Spain and Portugal, you also had aristocrats of Jewry within Charleston, South Carolina. All right, it says in 1833, Louisa married a cotton gin maker, William P. DaCosta. Go back to these sources right here. We see William P. DaCosta, cotton maker. We see Louisa DaCosta, right? So we know we're talking about the same people. It goes on to say, let's see. Okay, so that's all we needed from this page. But like it says in 1833, Louisa married a cotton gin maker, William P. DaCosta. Remember, these were people from Ireland. These were black people from Ireland, as the census said. It goes on to say, where should we start? Nancy Randall made legal arrangements regarding her slaves to ensure herself a comfortable old age. Thompson brought slaves from his in-laws. James fought another man in court over the ownership of slaves' property and traded slaves with his sister, Louisa DaCosta. So she's literally listed in the free colors, the free blacks and mulattoes of South Carolina book, yet she has slaves. This is very important because we're going to find out who this woman was, who these Dakotas were. These Dakotas were Jews, as it says. William DaCosta was probably Jewish as well as of African ancestry, right? Peep the hijack. Peep the hijack. We know that the Jews were already African. We know that the Jews were already black. So once again, William DaCosta was probably of Jewish as well as African ancestry. The DaCostas had been prominent members of Charleston's Jewish community since the 1740s. When we dealing with the DaCostas, these who we were talking about, man. These DaCostas who came in from Ireland. These were Jews, people of color, free Negroes. Some of them indulged in slavery, but so what? Because people were enslaved as well. Just like the other source said, these Afro-Portuguese, these Luso-Africans, these Sephardic Jews saw sub-Saharan Africans as themselves, as their brothers. These people were getting a few slaves to make money, not to oppress. Funny thing is about these people, although they had a few slaves, they were slaves themselves. How do we know that? Because they have a U.S. Freedmen's Bank record. The U.S. Freedmen Bank records are from everybody who were indentured servants or who were enslaved. So when our ancestors were free from indentured servitude or enslavement, they were registered with the U.S. Freedmen Bureau Bank. All right, they were registered with the U.S. Freedmen Bank records. All right, this right here just shows us that at some point in time, these people were freed from slavery or indentured servitude. More than likely, the Dakotas, when they first came into the United States, when the Dakota Jews, the black Jews, first came into the United States, they were under servitude. This is why we see that they have a U.S. Freedmen Bank record. Remember, those who were enslaved or in indentured servitude are those who would have U.S. Freedmen Bank records. All of our ancestors have these. We can take it to another example of a Costa who was black, but this time he was born in Portugal, right? Birthplace Portugal, December 1875, Joseph Costa. It's interesting because he came to the United States, right? This section is showing you all examples of these black Sephardic Jews in the United States. Here you go. He brought his whole family, Joseph Costa, Caroline Costa, Anton Costa, Mary Costa, black, 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 black. That's just the facts of it. And they was all coming from Portugal. The Sephardim were Negroes. The Sephardim were blacks. Next proof. Rabbi Abel Respect spent a lifetime urging Jews of color to discover their roots. Born in 1919 to a poor black family in North Philadelphia, right? We just read about the black Jews in Philadelphia. He grew up with a vague understanding of his religious background. His mother told him that the Bible was written in a different language, and his grandmother observed Jewish customs and told him that their people were worshipped, or people worshipped in secret in the past. Who had the worship in secret? The Sephardic, the new Christians. He goes on to say, I remember my father who read the Bible but never went to church telling me when I was 13 and should have been bar mitzvah. We're different from other Negroes. We are Jews. He told this to the New York Times in 1978. All right, this is what his father told him. We are different from other Negroes. We are Jews. He dropped out of high school at the age of 16, worked odd jobs to help support his family. At age 28, a series of mystic experiences, including dreams, motivated him to research his Jewish roots. Researching his Spanish last name led him to the stories of the Morenos, or Jews who practiced in secret during the Spanish Inquisition. His studies indicated he was a descendant from Morenos, also known as crypto Jews who fled persecution and may have resettled in North Africa. This man right here is a descendant of Sephardic Jews, a descendant of Morenos who settled in West Africa, right? See what he looked like. He's black, he's Negro. We're not dealing with the Europeans who came in and took over the Sephardic communities. We dealing to the direct prosperity. We dealing to with the direct descendants of these black Sephardics. So when he found out that he was what? A descendant of Moreno or a crypto Jew who had fled persecution and settled in North and West Africa, he goes on to state that he felt that if this was a possibility for his family as persons of color in the United States, then maybe there were other families who sort of lost their way and were crypto Jews because of circumstances such as the slave trade. And we showed you that these Jews went through the slave trade, right? We already showed you this. And basically, this is a rabbi basically saying that, hey, if this could happen to me, if I can trace my ancestry back and find out that I was a Sephardic Jew, then I'm sure there's other black families in America that can do this. He said there's other families that were crypto Jews but lost their ways because of the slave trade. That's because Judah and Israel was enslaved, man. The Jews, A Study of Race and Environment by Morris Fishburne. The Negro type among the Jews is yet to be mentioned. One occasionally meets with a Jew whose skin is very dark, the hair black and woolly, the hair long with a prominent acute, the face is prognathous, the two jaws are projecting in the form of a muzzle, the lips are large, thick, and unturned, and the nose flat, broad, and the wings upturned so that the nostrils can be seen in the profile. The Negro type can be singled out in a large assembly of Jews. They are more often mistaken for mulattoes, and the author knows of one who had considerable difficulty to get along with in the southern states of America. Let me read that again, because the author literally just said that they are often mistaken for mulattoes, and the author knows of one who had considerable difficulty to get along with one in the southern states of America. So the question is, who are these Negro Jews that he had a hard time getting along with in the southern states of America? That would be the Sephardim. That would be the Jews of Spain and Portugal. That would be their descendants who made their way to America, whether it was being free Negroes, whether it was being merchants, whether it was through the slave trade. That's mainly how these Jews got into the United States of America, or shall I say the Americas as a whole, right? The Jews came in as slaves, they came in as merchants, and they came in as free Negroes. You just got to accept those facts, because I brought it to you. I brought you all three of those facts. Now let's get into another example, but we're going to take it all the way to Jerusalem, right? To deal with another example of these Sephardic Jews. We're going to take this to the book called The Other, all right? The Other. And it literally says the black Jews or Sephardis. The black Jews or Sephardis are termed Franks, a term comparable in Israel to nigger. They are considered to fit only for second-class occupations, all right? So the Jews or the Sephardim that returned to Jerusalem, they were known as black Jews, and they were called Franks, which is the same thing in Israel as nigger in America. And excuse me for y'all that are sensitive to this word. I'm sorry. But I mean no harm by saying it, I promise. But this is just to point out the fact that nowhere these Sephardics went, nowhere the true Sephardics went, these people would be Negroes. These people would be black. These people would be people of color. These would not be no white Jews, all right? Speaking of white Jews, this book tells us that both in the United States and in South Africa, Jews were certainly not perceived as white until around the time of the Second World War. So before this, everybody knew the Jews were black. Both in the United States and South Africa, Jews were certainly not perceived as white until around the time of the Second World War. It should be known that Jews evolved from blacks because the Jews are black. The ancestors of the Jews were black. Sephardim in the Americas, all right? We're about to get ready to wrap this up, family. Sephardim in the Americas. The first American Sephardim soon became part of the American Jewish myth. All right, how did these black Sephardim soon become a part of the American Jewish myth? They were viewed as the grandees of American Jewish society. They constituted the aristocracy, a culturated group that has now all but vanished as a factor in the American Jewish community of the 20th century. Yet the Sephardic community continued to carry a certain mystique that led Ashkenazim to join and even take over Sephardic congregations and to claim Sephardic origins. This is what was going on, family. This is why the last source said both in the United States and South Africa, Jews were not seen as white until around the time of the Second World War, because what? These Ashkenazis were coming in, joining, and even taking over Sephardic congregations and even claiming Sephardic origins. How can you be white but claim to be black? That's basically what went on. White people claiming to be black. To that degree, the Sephardic meaning or style of worship was the American Jewish style until the 19th century. When was the Second World War? The 19th century. So we see things lining up. We see things lining up with the times they were moving into America and everything. Let's read this real quick. Such a strategy was even more successful than the Sephardim could have imagined. Research in the American Jewish history has shown that the first significant Jewish immigrants to America and to the Western Hemisphere were Jews from the West Indies and Europe who traced their ancestry to the Jewish communities in Spain and Portugal. So this is literally letting us know that the first Jews in America were those of a melanated complexion. They're not saying that outright, but we know that these Jews of Spain and Portugal were Negroes. We know that these Jews of Spain and Portugal would be so-called people of color today. It says the Spanish and Portuguese Sephardim dominated the religious, social, and economic life of American Jewry and the Jewry of the Western Hemisphere during the colonial and early federal periods. During the early colonial and early federal periods, this is when the Sephardim or the black Jews were dominant. But guess what it says? Despite the growing numerical superiority of the Ashkenazim, already evident in the third decade of the 18th century, by the 1830s, however, the Sephardim were overwhelmed numerically by a flood of Jewish immigrants from German-speaking Central Europe. Family, this what happened to the Sephardic Jews. This is why when you look up Sephardic Jews today, you see Europeans, family. These German Jews soon developed much of the institutional framework that would serve as the foundation for a future American Jewish community. Because these Ashkenazim flooded the Sephardic congregations. What the last page say? That Ashkenazim should join an even, right? So Ashkenazim should join Sephardic congregations and even claim to be Sephardic. That's what was going on. This is why we are confused with who the Sephardic Jews are to this day. This is why people think the Sephardic Jews are white. This is why we have people commenting under my videos telling me I don't know what I'm talking about. Right? Telling me that the Jews sent it to West Africa was white. Well, if they was white, please go debunk all these 100 sources I just outlined. We brought it from Babylon to the diaspora. We brought it from Babylon to the diaspora. We brought out First Chronicles chapter 9. We brought out 2 Kings verse 24. We brought out how the Spanish and Portuguese Jews claimed their descent from the Babylonian captivity. We brought out how these Jews were black as other Africans. We brought out how they was expelled to Africa. We brought out how they had slaves in Africa, but only reason they was doing that was to please the African kings and royals, because the African kings and royals were oppressing them. Right? We showed you that they were enslaved in Africa. We showed you that they were called Ladinos, Afro-Portuguese, Luso-Africans, Lancados. We showed you that they was enslaved right alongside other diasporic Africans. We showed you that they was free Negroes in the United States. We showed you everything you need to know about these Sephardic Jews, who they were, what they looked like, this and that. I could have even brought out genetic studies and showed you all they have the same genetic studies as us. They have the same DNA as Negroes who were in West Africa thousands of years before they even came. So again, family, you need if you need, you know what I'm saying, to basically this is the video that shows you the complete proof of what was going on. You know what I'm saying? People try to say, you know what I'm saying, these people were white that came into Africa. That's a lie. We was basically able to bring the complete history of these people. And that's it, family. That's it. So this probably be the last video I do on these Sephardim, because it's really not that much history, but more to bring out, but just bringing out more facts that they were enslaved, bringing out more examples of Sephardic Jews in America. But as far as the history, we know that they were black. We know that they looked African. You're not finna be calling no European Jews. You're not finna be calling no white Ashkenazi Jews Don David Negro. You just not. There's no Ashkenazi Jews walking around today named Don David Negro. There's no Sephardic, there's no Ashkenazi Jews walking around today, right, named David Yahya Ben Negro. Based off the old sources, based off the old records, we was able to prove what these people look like. We was able to prove that they not only intentionally married and mated with African women, they did that and not even knowing that they were making actual more Sephardic children, making more Israelite children. So always remember to peep that hijacking, peep that the lie that people like to use for that mulatto word. Because mulatto word goes two ways. You can be mixed of two black different nations, or one white nation and a black nation. You can be mixed of a black Sephardic Jew and a black African, or you can even be mixed of a white European Jew and a black African. Those two definitions would be mulattoes. It's just the way the history lines it up and the way the history explains it. So with that being said, I say Todah and Shalom to everybody for watching. Even if you all have a couple questions, you can drop them in the chat real quick. Shout out to the brother D-Tree out there. Make sure you all go check out his live tomorrow, man. Lion Farm. You know what I'm saying? He got a great channel. You already know we bring the brother up here. We always bring out a pretty good video for you all, bring out some pretty good information. But again, any questions and anything, drop them in the chat real quick before I head off. Just to let you all know, we will be bringing out some information on the 10 tribes, who they are. We already know who they are, but just bringing absolute proof. We also going to bring more proof on our Israelite presence within America, because a lot of people don't know that our ancestors actually real deal knew who they were, actually real deal claimed to be Jews, actually real deal came over here on slave ships singing the name Yah. So, you know, my channel is all about the history. My channel is all about the truth. You know what I'm saying? So, like I said, I see there's no questions in the chat as of now. But like I say, Todah for everybody that tuned in. Much love. Pray that you all enjoy the rest of your Shabbat. If I can throw something together tonight, I may go live again tomorrow. So just stay tuned for that. Once again, much love, much respect. Continue to stay faithful to y'all. Continue to love the Most High. I love y'all, family, and shalom. Todah for tuning in. And shout out to the brother right here for the beautiful comment, man. Hallelujah. All praises, all praises. All right, Todah, family. Until next time.